This has really driven the growth of passive house. Certified square footage is the increase has been 90% on the multifamily side.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes sense in so many different ways. So how do we do that on the single family side? The concept is to make it more of a manufactured product.
Right.
And this is something like the construction industry is the only major industry in the US where productivity rate has gone down in the last 30 years. The amount of product per labor hour has actually gone down.
Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Alan Gibson, manager of GO Logic LLC of Belfast, Maine, a 35-person design build firm, general contractor, and panel manufacturer. Gibson holds a BA from Brown University and is a certified passive house builder and designer. GO Logic's first FIAS, if I'm saying that right, certified home was completed in 2010. He is currently secretary of the FIAS Board of Directors and chair of the FIAS Alliance and speaks widely on passive design and construction. Our interview today is sponsored by Maine Home Design. Don't miss Gibson's design theory in the upcoming June issue of Maine Home Design. Thank you for coming into the studio today, Alan Gibson. Now, I've worked with Alan quite a bit in the past with GO Logic, and this is going to be a fun one because these guys actually build and then study the homes they build. They actually put sensors and stuff in there and actually break these things down. It's pretty interesting. These guys have thought about this a lot and do an incredible job at it. So take a listen. From my interactions with you, you have tended to be a very aware and intentional person. And I mean, that's reflected in, like, you've chosen like almost like a moral high ground of construction. You know, right. You're approaching what you do with an ethical side of what you feel you're responsible for and an example that you can establish. And that comes through in the work that you do, and it's why you do those things. And so, you know, I mean, I'm sure it's easy for someone, even with those good intentions, to get just locked into like a workaholic mindset just as much, but still, that degree of internal conversation and everything else that would be common in that, I think, probably puts you at some place of being a pretty good dad and everything else, I imagine.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about my dad time. Now my kids are gone, so it's a different phase.
How often did you break down crying before that moment happened? Yeah,
not too much, actually. You know, it just seemed, I was, I guess, happier more than anything. And it does, you know, like the teenage years, not that my kids were problem kids at all, but you do get to a point where like, you know, maybe it would be okay if they weren't in the house.
You need to start.
You know, just like it feels good to kind of successfully launch kids into their next thing.
Yeah, I was just listening to something about experiencing a conflict of emotions, that's the reason that the most difficult emotions are the ones that have a high degree of contrast. So when your kid's leaving to go to college, it's like, all right, I did this right, but at the same time, you're just crushed inside, like goodbye. You know, that's like, ooh.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet, and I don't want to face that, but
it's tough. I mean, it kind of happens gradually in some ways. Like they get more independence and they do more things than you're like, you cannot, like each step of that, you're like, okay, all right, I can handle that. And then there's the big move when, you know, you drop them off at college or you drop them off wherever they go, you know? The last 2 winters we've driven across the country and back just for family vacation and visiting family and friends and getting out of winter for a bit. Yeah.
And this last one on the way back, it really hit me how we're not their universe anymore.
Yeah.
We're their kind of base, you know?
Yeah.
And now they're incorporating friends just way, way more.
Yeah.
And that's so important to them at this time. And it's like, I still want to be everything for them and them not need anything else, but that's just unhealthy. And you have to be like, all right, I'll facilitate you spending time with your friends and I'll be on the sidelines cheering you on, you know? So.
Yeah. At some point you become less the authority for all known things. Like kids look up to parents like they know everything. And then at some point they don't.
Yeah, at some point they're like, oh, you don't.
No, I think you're wrong. You've been wrong about that the whole time, Dad.
I have this great example of exactly that. We were moving a mattress somewhere, and I'm pretty classically stuff like that, and be like, we're not going far. I won't go fast. It'll be fine. I'm just going to use a surf leash to hold this thing down, and it didn't work, and it came off like on Route 9, and like a piece of it went out into the road, and the person behind me ran it over. It was a really bad call on my part. And my oldest son was like, "This isn't good, Dad. You shouldn't do this because and I was like, it's gonna be fine,
Oh,
and after that, he was just standing outside as we were on the side of it looking at it. He's like, I was like, all right, you got this one. All right, okay. That's a hard process of admitting to yourself and your kids just the times when you've done the wrong thing. But I think if you can do that, it empowers them to, I think, more so admit to themselves their failures and grow from it and be more gracious with other people and everything in that process. So I'm doing my best to mess up all the time.
That's just, you got to get used to that. And not, you take it too seriously. It's a healthy process. Like it's
hopefully
all.
I just keep thinking like, oh, I'm gonna have to save up for their therapy sessions because
right. You can't. Whatever, you do the best you can.
So from constructing healthy humans, let's get into constructing healthy homes.
Yeah, sounds good.
So just starting off, like, how did you get into this? Why do you have an interest in what you do? And for people who don't know you, I know you fairly well from interacting with Go Logic all the time, but what exactly is it you do? What's the drive and vision of your company? And what keeps you getting up in the morning and passionate about it?
Sure, yeah. Well, Go Logic is focused on really high quality, high performing homes that conserve a lot of energy in a sense. And that is a goal because we're in a climate crisis and we've got to do what we can in the industry to make things better. Buildings contribute about 40% of all energy use in our economy. And
now is that like the actual consuming energy of running a home or building and running?
That's just the operational consuming energy that doesn't go into building homes.
Wow.
And I think there are a lot of issues, and there's a bigger focus on that these days than there used to be. But backing up a little bit, I've been a builder since the early 90s. And in those days, I'm a history major, so I didn't come at this from the trade side.
You're one of them educated contractors.
Exactly. So I was always into the academic side of things, and was interested in energy efficiency and what could be done, and learned all I could about that at a time when there wasn't that much being done. But there were little pockets of it that had come through the 80s and, energy crisis of the 70s. And I sought out those people, but it was a really hard sell to clients for a lot of reasons. Energy was really cheap, and nobody was that interested. So occasionally we'd get a client who was into it, and we'd do a more energy efficient home, but that was a rarity. And then in 2006, I saw the first presentation on Passive House in the U.S. at the NESE conference in Boston. And that was when Matt O'Malley, the co-founder of Go Logic, and I saw that, and he had been doing high-end residential architecture, and I've been kind of struggling along doing as efficient houses as I could. And we were both like, this is it. This is what we're doing. This is a system and a concept that is backed up by science, by physics. It gives us a modeling tool so we can estimate how much energy a house is going to use, which we were always just kind of shooting in the dark at before. And it was scientifically based on climate change, basically, that if we are going to
That was more so the impetus to the drive to scientifically approach and tune these homes towards passive house and be passive houses.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a standard. It was a line in the sand.
Yeah.
And if you meet that standard, then you are doing your part to try to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Right.
And so that's the motivating factor. It used to be, the bad things from the 70s, pollution and air quality, and just the financial side of it, the cost of all those things,
right.
and your own energy bill. And then it became, the focus shifted to climate change and carbon, and that's what has been driving it. So that's the impetus behind it.
Do you remember seeing, I had an architecture book in school that had all these different, I think it was a study of different window types for energy preservation within homes. And one of them would actually, it was a system that would blow into the glass little styrofoam beads at night, fill it all the way up. And that would be at night when you have most of your heat loss. And then somehow, I can't imagine all those beads would come back out because they're so statically, they'll cling. I mean, if you open something and it has the styrofoam, I'm always with my kids like, don't touch anything, I'll do it. Because as soon as you break it, it just it sticks on everything. And But did you ever interact with those?
I've seen a video of that. I mean, that was an idea that came out of the 1970s at like MIT or something, which is a cool idea. That's evolved a little bit. There have been other ideas about changing, I think, electrically charging metals in the glass to do essentially the same thing. So solar control, basically. If the sun is too bright, it'll turn kind of opaque or reflective. And if you want the solar gain, it will change to a different factor of solar gain.
Right.
And that is, there's been a lot of ideas about glass technology over the last 30, 40 years. There's another one that uses an optically clear polyester film, and that's being used in some products now, which gives you a lot of benefits on the energy side. And then low E coatings is the thing that has actually stuck. Like that's little particles of metal that have different properties. They basically allow ultraviolet rays to come in, but they stop, what are they called? The other longer wavelength from passing back out. Infrared. That's it. Yeah. Right. So it keeps infrared. So that was a huge advancement in window technology, and that was great. And there's also vacuum glass, which hasn't been perfected yet either. But
now, what is vacuum glass? Is that just like you vacuum the air out in the middle?
Creating a vacuum within two panes of glass.
I would imagine on the outside that's visually unpleasing.
Well,
because you get these like
problem is
do they concave?
What material do you put in between the two panes of glass so that it doesn't crush together? So if the two panes of glass touch, obviously you've lost all
thermal
the
bridge.
So I think it's not quite there yet.
It's probably pretty easy on smaller.
Probably
on a smaller scale, but if you get big at all, it's gonna just in the middle.
But that would that could be a huge advance. But for now, we're just using good old-fashioned 3 panes of glass with gases in between that are less conductive than air.
I mean, the selling points for me, I had never really, before shooting the little red go home for you guys, I had never really interacted with a house to that level of technical energy capture and insulation, all of that. And I remember like looking at some stuff around the house and I'm like, what are all these sensors? And you guys were actually monitoring the house in real time, like finding out where all the leaks are, how things, I mean, you were completely, it was a science project, basically.
Yeah.
And then I remember the day we shot it, there wasn't a ton of snow on the ground, but it was in, I think late December or January, and it was 10 degrees out. I remember it was 10 degrees out, so it was extremely cold. And I remember sitting up in one of the rooms that you guys were using as an office. I'm not sure if it was staged as a bedroom because we were shooting. But I remember sitting in a chair next to that window, and I was like that far from the window. And previously, we lived in a house here in downtown that has no insulation and had single pane windows.
Yeah.
So on a 10 degree day, you're in the center of the home, like staying away from, But sitting next to that window, it felt like zero heat loss. And I was just in a t-shirt, 10 degree day. And I was like, suddenly winter's not that bad. The sun's out and I'm warm next to a window and I could sit here and read, And that was the first kind of time I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it. Like there's more than just the virtue of doing this. There's also this is a nice experience to actually not feel that heat loss, and then to see people taking it that seriously, studying it like that, and breaking it down into all those parts was very much that kind of set me on the first track, if you will, of thinking like, all right, when I get to the point of building a home, I'm either going to have these guys do everything, or else I'm going to rip it off as much as I can.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, triple pane, I got to get thick wall,
Yeah.
So being a, do it yourself kind of guy in a way, my wife got very involved in like starting to think about all these different materials, windows types, insulation types, how to do this, how to do that. And then with my architecture background, we figured it out and got a pretty good house out of it. I'd imagine it's a cross between a GO Logic performance and Caleb Johnson and GO Logic kind of look to the whole thing. So
nice. Yeah,
is influenced by my big clients.
Yeah, cool. That's very cool. Yeah, but you hit on some really good points there. I mean, there's a comfort standard that's part of Passive House, which is exactly that. If you are next to a window, the temperature difference can't be more than 6 degrees from the temperature in the center of the room, right? Okay. And that's deemed to be, not so much temperature difference that you're going to feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And the only way you can do that in this climate is with a triple glazed window that has a certain value to the energy loss, to the heat loss. So that's, a clear example of where that standard actually helps us design better buildings. It's not just, and it takes the guesswork out of it. But comfort is a big deal. And that's kind of, when we first started doing it, we tried to sell it on energy savings and, the numbers and the geeky part of it. And customers don't. Yeah. Some do. Like we get a lot of scientists who want our houses because they understand that geeky side. But for the average buyer, we sell more on comfort, durability, resilience. Resilience is a big one.
Now, when you say resilience, what do you mean by that?
Well, what happens when the power goes out?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And we've seen this happen time and time again. The Texas freeze that happened a winter or two ago.
It was a big problem.
It was big. It was a big problem. And those buildings were clearly, a lot of things failed, but the houses failed because the houses got extremely cold in a short amount of time.
Right.
So Passive House eliminates that. We can make a house that will essentially, even if you went away in the winter for a month, it would not freeze.
Wow.
Right.
So interestingly, on a bad storm while we were gone this winter, ice and water built up on our mini split system, and it couldn't work because I think we had a really bad nor'easter, and our mini split is on the east side of the house. Yeah. And somehow the fan got stuck or something. Yeah. And it didn't break it. It still works, but it stopped working at that time. Yeah. And when we're gone, I have this little thing that monitors the humidity and temperature in the house, so I can just kind of know, like, if it drops, hey, can someone go over there and check it out? So it kept sending me all these things when the temperature would change like 1 degree outside. So it was just like, eventually I was like, come on, it'll be fine. And then my brother-in-law and sister-in-law came out, and I was like, well, we're not there. You guys stay at our house, So they get there, and it's 32 degrees inside the house. Yeah. And we were just like, oh my goodness. But none of the pipes froze. Everything was fine. So a lot of it is that we're built right on ledge, and the contractor was telling us that our pipes that come from the well are sitting right on ledge with then insulation, rigid insulation over top of them, and only like 2 or 3 feet of earth. And he was saying that when you put them against ledge like that, they don't freeze anywhere close as easily as when they're just exposed even 4 feet under. So
because the ambient temperature of the earth is 45 degrees or
radiating
whatever.
up or whatever,
you run into that a lot in Maine, and we've had to insulate many a water line in that situation. But we've done experiments in our houses where middle of winter, coldest time, power goes out, and temperature drops in the house maybe 2 degrees a day. Wow. So if you start at 70, 5 days later, you're going to be at 60.
So you've taken one of the houses you've built, cut the power, and it
okay. I guess it wasn't that extreme. No, we didn't do that to any one. But, well, actually, we built a small dormitory at Unity College, and we kind of did that over a winter break when kids were gone. And we got some really interesting results because we were monitoring room by room. Mm-hmm. And we did it while kids were there also. And what we found was we're also monitoring temperatures in the room over time. And it was really interesting because one room would be like high 70s, low 80s, while another room would be, low 60s. And we're like, what's going on? And then somebody went to look, and the room that was cool, the student had their window open while they're heating. And the other room, they just cranked their heat in the room. Sure. And I was kind of bummed about that at first until someone reminded me that, in a building like that where heat loss is so minimal, those kinds of changes in temperature don't really have a big effect. Like even if you're heating the room to 80, it's not going to use as much energy as a standard house where it's up to 60.
When you say a building like that, do you mean that building type being a dorm or one that's
no,
constructed
just like
that way?
A passive house, basically. So that's another interesting thing about passive houses, that when you're monitoring buildings, occupant behavior can affect the energy performance by like a factor of 2. It's a big, and I've seen this. People have done presentations where, identical house A and house B are operated differently, and one uses twice as much energy as the other. So the model is only as good as
you have to have behaviors and a thought process and a lifestyle that takes that into account, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and if people, studies have also shown that if people see their energy use on a regular basis, they'll change their behavior.
Oh yeah. So an interesting thing, we just put solar in. My wife really wanted to do that. I really drug my feet on that. Now I'm kind of like, all right, pretty cool. Yeah. Because you can just open up an app and you can see like how much energy you've used and how much you've generated and how much you're selling to the grid and all that. And it's actually, you start to get these data points for, what you're actually doing in a intelligible way, which is kind of like, oh, okay. And here you can see the water heater went on, and that, we actually did a photo shoot years ago on a project in Richmond, Virginia. Interestingly, it was on my birthday that we shot it, but we had to fly down the day of, and it was, like southern thunderstorm, horrible day when we arrived. And right when we got to the site, the clouds parted and there was sun and like these great beautiful clouds, and everything was like shiny because it was wet, but it was sunny. It was really neat. But the project was these 2 identical looking houses, but one was framed at the normal construction type of the area, and then the other was built to these really high, I don't know if it was passive house standards, but they and I think it was the University of Virginia, I believe, that was doing this, and they were studying it. I think the shoot was maybe for Fine Home Builder. I'm not positive.
Were they dormitories?
I think they were low-income housing. I'm not positive. Right, okay. Yep. I remember it being near other like housing buildings, and they were like just across the street from it in a field. So, but I never saw the data or anything from that. I wasn't really at the point of considering my effect in the world. I was just consuming at that point. Yeah. So,
interesting.
But yeah, it was an interesting project, and it was really interesting that like we just got there, everything cleared, we were able to shoot, and then it came back in, and then the next morning there was a bomb scare at the Richmond airport, and we couldn't get out until like. Yeah, everyone was outside sitting on the ground in the parking lot, and it was like nothing happened in the building. But not that I was wishing that something would happen, but
right, yeah.
If you're gonna clear us out. So what's the biggest hurdle right now for getting more of the country on board with this type of construction and this way of thinking to actually value it?
That's a really good question. I think there are a lot of ways to look at that. If it was part of an overall energy, climate change mitigation strategy, it would be great. I mean, we just don't have the political will to do that yet.
We just want to fight currently.
We just want to, yeah, well, we just want to consume. We just want, we don't
Yeah.
want things to change. We just want our cheap fuel.
Right.
And, you know, on the state level, some things are happening. Some states are out in front of other states. Like California has a pretty aggressive climate mitigation plan. Maine has a pretty good one too. And there's some fundings for some parts of it. I think it's somewhat misguided, but we don't have a comprehensive national energy plan, even though, well, whatever. Biden has a good plan, I think, but it's not going to get through Congress, or parts of it that were going to be in the Build Back Better plan just didn't happen. So people are talking about this a lot, and it's incredibly urgent. We know we really only have 10 years to make the big changes that we need to make, but that's just way too short a timeline for where we are right now. For humans, yeah, exactly. So my pessimistic side is like, yep, we're just going to keep consuming at the rate we're consuming until we're all done. That's one scenario. Or we're going to figure it out, but it's going to be too slow to keep massive suffering from happening.
Right.
That's another likely scenario. And the kind of pie in the sky scenario is, yeah, we're just going to change over all of our energy to renewable and we'll all be fine. And that I think is the
biggest pie in the sky is climate change is a conspiracy theory by the left, and we don't need to worry about this. Yeah, I think that's the negative pie in the sky.
Yeah. It just seems so much harder to maintain that. I mean, it's a conspiracy theory. That's the only, like, there's no scientific rationale for that. It's only in the conspiracy theory camp that you can say that anymore.
Right.
And as it starts to hit home more, I mean, like the movie Don't Look Up. Did you see that?
Oh, that was disturbing.
Very disturbing,
So
but
disturbing.
it was so right on. It's like climate
the
change.
administrators were in a popularity contest.
Exactly.
And like facts are staring them in the face.
Right.
And they're kind of like,
This asteroid is going to destroy life on the planet. Yeah. Oh, well, wait, we're about at the midterm elections. What does this mean? We can't be negative.
Not trending.
No, we got to make a positive spin on this.
My imaginative side was way too engaged when they were at, like, in Wisconsin, sitting around the table and like everything starts moving. Like, I can feel that. I can imagine that.
And what are they talking about? Like, where their coffee comes from? Isn't this a good bottle of wine? And it was
Well, I mean, that
so
moment they were like they were trying to, like, let's not think about that we're all about to die, but just, like the pleasantries of being human. Like, it's gone too far and there's no changing it. That's just it's a timely movie, and I hope it scared some other people as much as it scared me. But it at the same time, you kind of feel like I'm a single individual. What can I do?
Exactly. Yeah, and as a business, I have the same attitude. Like,
but what you've done is you guys started out in genuinely, I was probably in my mid to late 20s when I started first hearing about you guys and interacting with you, and in conversation with other design firms, it was like, yeah, they're really focused on that ecology, whatever side of it. And it's just not whatever. Yeah. And I watched it go from you guys shouldering a burden of like, no, this is going to be something that's positive and it's going to set us apart, to like not really knowing if that's going to be a key to success for you guys, or if it's just going to be a burden that makes you not able to succeed while everyone else is able to run and develop and do things cheaper and faster. But you guys took that on, you took it seriously, and you saw enough of the writing on the wall, I guess, to get to a place where this has been successful, and it's stayed in the public conversation enough through your efforts, in my opinion, it's changed the overall conversation, that it comes up more often just in people talking about, there's this quirky little firm doing this thing, that becomes this, in many ways nationally known for all these things, that is making change. It feels glacial, I imagine, from your position, but I keep having the similar conversation with people that are extremely fed up with our political situation. And I keep telling the idea is like, it's always been this way and it's never going to change. But at the same time, we're at this point where we're having to in our evolution, we got to a point where we had too much food, and that became a problem for us. Which before that, how could we ever imagine that would be a problem? Right. Then we're just learning how to deal with that. Now we're at a point where we have too much information, and we don't really know what. Because when I go to bed at night, my mind is going, don't give up, don't stop. Look at this other YouTube video on this other thing that you're interested in. Yeah. And keep consuming. Yeah. And I'm like, I gotta sleep some point. And like 12 o'clock comes and finally turn it off. It's like we first had to acclimate our bodies to this overconsumption of food. Right. Now we have to acclimate our minds to an overconsumption of information. We have to start limiting and engaging, like how and where do we do this? But it's through this connectivity that we're able to share things like you're doing, the things that are important, that are healthy in this mental diet of information that can contribute to the overall success of all of us. So in that evil thing of connectivity, of social media and everything that can be so damaging, there's also that opportunity if we just have to go through the evolutionary pains of letting it destroy us to some degree, realizing it, coming back from there and saying, this is a healthy way to interact with information. And here's healthy information that's going to affect us in a positive way. So, yeah, that's, well said. It's a double-edged sword, right? We have all this access to information, but weeding through the stuff that's garbage and what so much of it is like useful. Twinkies that's so good.
Yeah, well, there's that too.
But it just kills you, you know?
Yeah.
But there's this other stuff like, well, how do we actually build and live better? You know, that's good information to have an easy connectivity to.
Right. Yeah. And we all kind of know it, I think, deep down. Like we're all aware of our gradual, continual disassociation with nature. And we feel it all in visceral ways, whether we really recognize it or not. Yeah. And that's, our thinking, because we're intelligent beings, the way we've got here is by making rational decisions for the most part. If we can grow more food with, agriculture, let's do that so we can have more people. And then, but that leads to other things that are very negative, right? Right. But it all kind of, every decision was like, that was a good, let's come up with a way to make a machine to do this thing so we don't have to be tied to it physically. Fine. Right. But that leads to all kinds of problems. And one thing, leads to another. And then here we are. And we've got to try to, like you mentioned, limits. Like that's the hard thing our society can,
we've kind of technologically cracked that code.
We don't get all the information, there are no limits. Yeah.
All the calories.
So the vision of the future, what is it? Is it, on the eco side, let's just forget cities and let's forget technology and let's just go back to some, romanticized version of the 19th century.
Farming society. There's a historical
agro utopia. I don't know, agricultural. Well, there's agricultural. And I'm attracted to that. That's why I came to Maine in the first place, was to do small scale organic farming. And I couldn't make a living at that, so that's when I got into building. But
we're doing that.
A lot of people are making a living at organic farming, which is great. And the development of like local food and better quality food is great. And now we have serious chemical issues in our soil from some other good idea that went wrong, right? The PFAS problem. So in Waldo County, there are lots of farms that are just finding out that the soil and their water and their bodies are totally contaminated with forever chemicals that came from industrial processes of, up until very recently.
Are those the places closer to the pulp mills and stuff, or farming?
It's this range of chemicals is called PFAS. I don't know what it stands for, the chemical name, but it's used in things like Gore-Tex, so a coating on your jacket that make it water repellent. Yeah. It's used in nonstick cookware.
Oh, Teflon.
And also there's a big Chinette factory in Waterville, and it's used on paper so it doesn't get as soggy at your picnic. Right? Yeah. So that's a big problem they solved with this chemical, but it turns out it's highly toxic and, carcinogenic. And now because of biosolids recycling at the municipal waste water treatment plant, and then programmed to spread that on farm fields, we have distributed this chemical over thousands and thousands of acres and literally ruined the livelihoods of a lot of farmers.
Do they have a solution for this? Or?
No, abandon the land. I mean, I think there are some bio solutions that can tie it up in the soil or in different crops that can then be removed. Mm-hmm. But I don't know all the technical sides of it. It's awful. I mean, that story, it just so happens to be taking place in Maine.
It's probably story one of thousands.
1,000 and millions. And, the more common one is the power plant or the industrial facility that's sited next to a low income, often, minority neighborhood. And they're just trashed and loaded with chemicals and terrible air quality. And that's just the way we do things in our industrial world.
Well, I mean, for the longest time, we had a plant next door, like across this street, that would just burn all the trash of New England.
Yeah.
Right there. They would just incinerate it all.
Yeah.
And when the thing first came in, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, a friend of mine who's lived here his whole life, he said, like on certain days you'd come out to the playground and it would be covered in snow, but it wouldn't be snow. It would be ash from this thing. Oh. And I mean,
who knows? You can only imagine what's in that because it gets rid of the bulk, the mass of the waste, but all the toxins are concentrated in the ash.
And get this, they had to have the air quality that came out the chimney tested.
Yeah.
But it was only once a year.
Oh my
and
God.
They knew the day it would be tested. I mean,
it's
how
right. But that's that's like a great example of how government regulation is designed to make people safer and healthier. But since the 1980s, there's been this huge drive by the Republican Party to make any kind of regulation look like a hindrance to business, and therefore will have negative economic impacts, fewer jobs and lower tariff and blah, blah, blah.
To be fair, the conservative mindset, not as much the conservative party, but a conservative position towards introducing a new chemical into a process like farming. To me, I would approach that conservatively. I would say, I don't know if this change should be done so quickly. That's not to say that's a political position, but that's a conservative disposition to say, that's a big change. Let's go conservatively with this,
Yeah, I totally agree. And conservatism with a big C, traditional conservatism, I agree with a lot of that, and it's what got us our national parks, and it's what got us actually the clean air, clean water standards that came in under the Nixon administration. I mean, there are plenty of examples, but now it's shifted so far.
Oh yeah, we're just becoming
that
continually.
Now there's a rift, and there are some more traditional conservatives, but then there's the Trump party, and they're at odds, and they're radically different visions of what America should be. That's been, I guess it's a natural consequence of where we've been going, and it's being seen around the world the same way. I think,
like we were just earlier talking kind of how humans make decisions and how they get themselves in trouble. And if I take a evolutionary view, time scale of why we do the things we do, like for us to get where we're at, to have this more energy intensive use of a brain, everything as you get more refined and more intricate and more highly evolved, more complex, you become in many ways more fragile. So it's kind of like if you look at F1 cars, they're the absolute pinnacle, the lightest yet strongest yet high performance. Yeah. But if you bump it the wrong way, the wheel comes off, and because the carbon's built to take strength,
Right.
And so as we lose fur and become like, oh, now we have to make clothes, but we've lost this thing that can be a degradation to us. If like you have all this fur and you've gotten ticks and everything in it, you have to groom more often, and like don't have time and energy. And then
we groom plenty as modern humans.
Yeah, oh yeah. But I mean, losing all that came at a cost. I'm sure there was some. I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but I'm sure there's some benefit to as why we lost that and became less strong, but consumed more of our energy towards intellect rather than physical prowess. Because you take a half-size human chimp, and they're way more powerful than a full-size human. They're just crazy. We're not like that. We've evolved to be a different thing. And so each gain comes with an added complexity that you have to manage. And so this added gain of, social media and all that, and this glut of information, it comes at like, all right, we're moving into a realm where we're going to be, in some sense, more fragile because we have all this opportunity of information, but we have to learn how to grow with it and manage it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting analogy for how we proceed in the modern world and toward sustainability. Mm-hmm. I was saying earlier, it's like either the agro, like return to some romanticized past, or we utilize more of these fragile systems. Actually, we got to go all in. Like we go even in deeper, because utilizing digital technology does result in less intensive resource use. Yeah. Because you can do things more efficiently. And actually, I heard a guy from MIT talking about this on a podcast. The rate of resource extraction over time is now starting to taper off.
Really? Even with like battery technology and all that?
It's still going up, but at a slower rate.
Right. Okay? Starting to plateau.
It's starting to plateau a little bit. Now that, we have, and some other things could happen too, like, the movement of people. We just have to manage people more, unfortunately, and it will result in a loss of freedom. And you look at China, where it's a completely authoritarian system where everyone there's surveillance on every movement.
Managed to a much higher degree.
But overall, much more efficient. And they're able to do things that we could never dream of. Like they're building brand new eco cities that are models for development of cities around the world, but they will build a city for 10 million people from scratch. Wow. And that's something we don't do, but it comes at a big cost, and we have to figure that out.
That's a really interesting paradox for me, in that I've come to understand that the best truth to move forward only comes when you have true freedom and ability to voice dissent. Yeah. Because on one side, you're going to have this push to like, this is the idea, and they'll usually, if it's a cutting edge idea that is a risk, there's going to be a high degree of people who like love it, and then a high degree of people who hate it. And a lot of times this will frame along political lines, and that balance between one conservative side of a population feeling that something is good and the other feeling it's bad, that tension makes things go slower. But it's the same in many ways as not just throwing chemicals at farming issues. It's like, all right, you can get a great crop out of this year if you just douse this in whatever, and you'll get a great yield. But what's going to happen down the line? You need that tension. And for any one side to think they have a clear picture, I imagine they'd be very effective for a time. But then it potentially could go really bad, because I think actual real freedom and the ability for discourse and that ability to actually fail and learn from it is so incredibly part of our evolutionary process, that attempt, fail, learn from fail, and then refine and change over time. I imagine, like you're saying, China can decide and do like that because they're a one-party system. Right. But at that same time, well, just don't be a Uyghur in that system, because then you're in a concentration camp.
Don't be a political.
The rest of the world doesn't care.
Dissident of any kind. Right. Yeah. And we have such an uneven and hypocritical foreign policy, where we do tons and tons of trade with China, even though they're one of the more repressive countries in the world. And then we shout and scream at other countries that we don't like because they're, perceived as having a repressive authoritarian government. It's just not, Saudi Arabia or, whatever, countries that have very few equal rights and human rights and women's rights and all the rest of it. But they're an important trade partner for oil. So we gotta, we don't criticize them. But it's interesting. I think the idea of freedom is really interesting. And I think that concept has gotten so fuddled and manipulated by political parties in this country
Mm-hmm.
that it's really worth examining what freedom means. And a lot of times it comes down in this country to sort of social service programs that Democrats want because it turns out people want them,
Mm-hmm.
but they're attacked on this freedom issue. So take socialized medicine for one thing.
Which I have never been able to bring myself to vote Republican. I'm very liberal as a personality type, but being my age where it is, I see the lack of awareness within myself and value the people who are oriented to what is far differently than me, who can put me back in check when I go off, right?
Right. So when Obamacare, even before that, I think it was the last big fight was before the ACA, when there were rallies organized by Republicans where people got out there and said, stop this socialist medicine because it's going to take away my freedom.
Right.
And my response is, freedom from what? Freedom from having a crappy healthcare system, by not having adequate insurance, by having a lot of uninsured people who only go to the emergency room when they have a problem and get acute care.
Right.
So we have overall terrible health results in our country, and yet the freedom argument wins. Like, we are free to be unhealthy and to die slow and painful deaths.
Right. Well, they frame it as that, and from the opposite side, you can see it as we could have a system that could prevent you dying the slow and painful death that you insist on having because of freedom. It's such a weird quagmire. Like, I think that I would be in favor of socialized medicine because I see the profit conflict in there. That to me is like that's the thing for me that
it's not a good use of capitalism, I don't think. Trying to maximize profits.
There's
on
an encouragement for
health.
Repeat customers that's intrinsic in capitalistic ventures.
Yeah, and just the market sets the price for basic healthcare, or no, it should be a basic human right, and housing I would put in that same category. And look at so
I'm a little more stoic on that.
We compare our system to the quote unquote socialism of Europe,
right?
And particularly northern
Scandinavian.
So I read an interesting book about the Scandinavian way of life, where the author is Finnish, and she's talking about the differences in the two systems because she moved to the U.S. and to be with a partner, and then was really torn back and forth. So the way she describes it is about this freedom issue. Okay, so in Scandinavia, you have universal health care, never have to worry about that. You have really good education options through, university education that's totally free. Mm-hmm. You have a sensible transportation system that gets you pretty much anywhere you want. Yep. You have healthcare for older people that, again, is free. And the result of all this is that not only is it monetarily, so the other side of it is a much bigger share of your paycheck goes to these government
much higher taxes.
Programs. Much higher taxes.
Do they have a much healthier middle income,
Yes.
in their countries?
Yes. So, I mean, I've spent my wife's mother's Danish, so we spent a lot of time in Denmark, and you can see it, you can feel it.
You look like you should be able to speak Danish.
Yeah, I don't very well.
I don't know why that would come out.
Well, I mean, my background is more Swedish and some Danish too. But anyway, at the end of the day, even after paying this huge tax burden, because so many things are automatically paid, you end up with more money in your pocket at the end of the month. And the standard of living for the Scandinavian countries and even Germany is higher than ours.
How much time have you spent in Canada?
Not a lot.
It's alarming how much more friendly they are. And I don't think it's just a cultural thing. I think a lot of it has to do with what you're saying about, what you're talking about, that Scandinavian type of socialism, where it's like education and healthcare are not an anvil hanging over your head.
Right. Or I mean, it's like the stress that people are under to pay for their basic needs.
Yeah.
Food, shelter, repairing the car that they need so they can drive to their job wherever it is, because we don't have sensible transportation system. It all results for Scandinavian people of actually being freer from those kinds of burdens and those kinds of risk and that kind of stress. So they're able to enjoy life better. And, the happiness studies that are being done, the Scandinavian countries come in at the higher end of that year after year.
There's super interesting stuff with their sociological studies too. They're the most egalitarian societies for the longest time.
Right.
And what they're finding is the stereotypes become more pronounced between the sexes in those countries.
That's interesting.
Because the women in those countries no longer feel like, here's a job that you don't get to do, because typically it's men. Right. And they've spent a lot of time saying, look, you can do whatever you want to do, and we're going to work towards equal pay on equal jobs and all that, and we're doing this for a long time. And they thought what they'd get is a more egalitarian distribution, but what they found is the stereotypes were the jobs that were more relational just increased more to the stereotype. Again, these are outliers and a bell curve thing.
Interesting.
So the sexes became more distinct because they were free to simply not have the societal pressure or the lack of ability to do what they wanted to do. Is like, no, you genuinely can do what you want to do. And the bell curve distribution of stereotype of jobs became more pronounced, which not because anyone was denying, but because there is the freedom to not have stigma or anything else there.
Yeah. So that's, they've evolved through that. We're not quite there yet.
Now, the interesting pushback on that, I'll just keep interrupting you. I'm great at it. Sorry. The interesting pushback is I would highly agree with a state level authorization of something like that rather than a federal. Because the Scandinavian countries are basically the size of an American state a lot of the time.
A lot of it, it's true. Being smaller,
to do that on that scale is more effective, because I trust my state government far more, and there's more accountability, because I can go over, here and say, what are you doing, But on federal level.
I can agree with that, except it turns out that in the U.S., most states, at this point anyway, are much more regressive than progressive.
Really?
And that's just the political side of things.
See, I wish we'd have more of that.
As states are allowed to do more on their own, they're limiting things like voting rights, like abortion rights, like other health rights.
It because the more states' rights drive is typically a conservative thing? Is that
more, that's how it always been. And that's what, so like from the Civil War, right? The states there, from the founding of the Constitution, there's a big big separation between states' rights people and federal rights people, Hamilton versus Jefferson. And, Hamilton kind of got the upper hand for the most part, but the southern states during the time leading up to the Civil War, because they wanted to preserve the institution of slavery, made a big case for states' rights, so that states that were controlled more by the slave owners could get their way. And that's why the war was fought. And after the war, when the federal government imposed freedom, basically, on all the slaves,
attempted to impose
the states rebelled. And they passed their own local laws restricting everything for former slaves. The right to vote, access to credit, access to land, things that were stolen, law enforcement, civil rights. I mean, that didn't get corrected until the 1960s. It was 100 years before that actually started to get corrected. And now there's a move to go back in that former direction. It's all totally based on racism and the white man thinking that all of these minorities are taking away what they are, what's rightfully theirs. And that's what drives so much of the states' rights policy. And after the last election, this big move to restrict voting rights, basically for people to make it more difficult for people to vote. And it turns out just, happens to be that people of color are more likely to vote if they have an easier way to do it. So voting, early voting.
Well, I think that
mail-in
would
ballots.
be fair for everybody. I mean,
It would be, but it turns out politically, the way it plays out is that white people are more likely to go vote on the day, whereas people of color need, because they're burdened more by jobs, so they can't necessarily get the day off or childcare or whatever. They're more likely to vote if they have other ways of doing it.
Right.
But you mentioned something. The Egalitarian Society of Scandinavia is a huge difference, is a cultural difference. And part of what their taxation system does is it's really progressive. So as you earn more, you pay more. You pay more of your fair share. And so they have much better
the
income
highest speeding
distribution.
Tickets have been in Scandinavia because they base it off of your income.
Yeah, everything's based off your
like
income, basically.
$9,000 ticket.
You can get to a point where I think, they may have changed this now, but I think in Sweden, there was a time when over a certain point, 100% of your income above that level goes to taxes, which has been proposed by politicians in different places. There was a socialist politician in the last French election who set the line at, I think, 450,000 euros a year, which to our mind, to our capitalist-like, extractive, get as much as you can mentality, that would be political death if anyone mentioned that. But if you think about it, like how hard would it be to live on $500,000 a year? Like, would that be a limit that we could all accept?
I don't think it would be hard.
I don't think it would be hard either. I think you'd be pretty comfortable if you could earn $500,000 a year. But there are a growing number, a concentrated number of people who earn 5 million, billion, gazillion dollars more than that, and to the point where the top 20 Americans own
it's a
40% of all the wealth. I mean, it's
lopsided.
Insane. So in terms of limitations to making changes in an ecological way, is political will is one, and economic redistribution of wealth is the second. If we could take, just imagine if we took 100% of, Jeff Bezos' salary over $2 billion. How about that? Could he live on $2 billion a year, do you think? Comfortably. How many yachts can you have for that? And all the rest of that was plowed into services and climate change mitigation programs. We would be in a much, much better place right now for survival for all of us. But that's something that no one is going to touch.
I don't know that I agree with you, but I don't know that I can make an argument against you.
Yeah.
There's something in that the red flags that go off in my head are like there is a driving force in competition, and there's a benefit from it. I know, and I know that the negative aspects of our personalities can still be beneficial when harnessed in the right way. Like greed, can also be painted as drive. And they can do those things, and they can be good in some way, but as we can witness, they can be horrible too. And so I'd love to hear an argument of if you start taking everything over a certain amount, this is what we forecast will happen. But if you do that, then we do take it over that, and then we redistribute it that way, it'll be good, because there's always these arguments. It's hard to understand.
Look at Scandinavia again. Mm-hmm. First of all, just to be clear on terminology, Scandinavian societies economically are totally capitalist.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's a capitalist economic system, and socialism is an economic system, but because it's been tied incorrectly to social service programs, that's become what socialism is.
Right.
But it's not. It's a totally capitalist economy in Northern Europe.
Right.
And it's about limits, as you said. So people, I don't see Scandinavians as not being forward thinking or innovative, right? Look at the great design and the great products and IKEA and all the stuff that comes out of Scandinavia with limits in place. It's not, I don't think that the limits of, say, your taxation rate is doing anything to hamper innovation or forward thinking, or a better society, a better vision of society for everyone. Because it turns out, actually, when everyone is doing better, everyone's doing better.
Yeah,
right?
I fear the collapse of our middle class. It's getting so pulled.
It's totally polarized because the rich are just sucking from the poor and the middle class as well. And, you can look at the numbers and you can just feel it. Like walking around Denmark, okay, it is a wealthy country and it earned its wealth through lots of unsavory ways, like all the developed countries have, through colonization and extraction of wealth from other resources, other places.
I don't think
that's
there's
its history.
Single tribe, group of people, or race on Earth that hasn't done that.
Correct.
To be clear,
but
we're the ones that have currently benefited from it and still are.
Yeah,
we're just in that fortunate position, right?
There is some reason why the Anglo-Saxons are the most rapacious.
Rapacious, what's that mean?
Oh, just wanting to rape, wanting
rapacious.
Wanting to. Well, I guess that's not. I think it just means like wanting to consume and conquer and pillage more than other peoples are. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but that's our ancestry. And
Viscos and the Mongols and the.
Well, yeah, I mean there are plenty of other examples, but I guess the Anglo-Saxons came around at the right time in history when technology allowed them to do more than anyone ever done before.
Some comedian has a great line. Is like, you think you're good now, but you go back a few hundred years and we were still pooping too close to the tent while the Muslims were developing algebra. That's like Al Jazeera. This is algebra. They developed algebra.
And that was a big threat too,
and we were pooping too close to the tent, so
right. Oh, I know.
There's cycles.
But I think it's just kind of in some ways the luck of history and technology and positioning, but some kind of spirit of consuming more and wanting to do better and get ahead. And I mean, again, they're positive and understandable.
They're a coin
mental
with good sides and bad sides.
Yeah, human feelings. But why did people leave England and other countries, Germany and Scandinavia and Italy, to come to the United States in the early days of the country? Is because they were not satisfied. I guess that's part of it. Is like a dissatisfaction with where you are now and a belief that you can always do better.
Right.
And that's what founded America.
Yeah, I would imagine that all these countries that immigrants came from were these highly polarized countries, probably at some point where there was ultra rich and ultra poor in that way.
Yeah.
And that there was no ability to get ahead as a lowly individual. And all of a sudden there's this country where they're like, no, we can all
blank slate.
Take a swing at it.
Yeah.
If you can swing hard enough, you're going to survive here.
Yeah.
And we got America and Canada got, you can do that here too, but we're going to be a little more egalitarian or gentle in this process.
Right.
So we have this Canada, Europe right next to each other, but we have these kind of different political systems, and I can feel it in America that it's a dog-eat-dog society.
Right. Yeah.
And you better get going, else you will be consumed. Whereas Canada, when I interact with people there, it's far more like they will take the time to just talk to you.
Right.
Like, I'll never forget, we went through a gas station, and this was in Halifax. We were there surfing and got some snacks, checked out. And the guy at the counter was like, hey, how you guys doing? Where are you from?
Right.
You don't get that in any convenience store in the U.S. And then he goes into like, oh, great. Well, there's an art opening, tonight, over there. You guys should come by, and we were just like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, that's too bad. You think that. Yeah, right.
But,
no, I know.
And then you kind of realize like, oh, these are just people who are not pulled to the degree as like you go out and you work your butt off and then at night you crash and you got to do it again tomorrow because we have this mentality of must succeed at any cost.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing.
I will say the one downside I see of European and Scandinavian countries is that you kind of have to, and this is maybe comes out of the decision to be more egalitarian. I'm not sure how it fits in, but it is a little bit more regimented in terms of what you can do. Oh, and once you make a decision, you have to kind of stick with that. It's really hard to change careers. You need,
really?
Yeah, I have, I had a guy from Austria start working for me a few years ago, and he had a degree in IT from Austria, and he wanted to learn carpentry. So I hired him. He was a smart guy. He was good with his hands. He'd grown up on a farm. He was pretty good. Within a couple, 3 years, he had become a foreman and he was managing other people. Well, he decided to move back to Austria. And when he got back there, he could not get hired on a building crew, because he hadn't gone through the apprenticeship program and gotten a certificate.
Far more regulations. And
way more regulation.
Else.
Now, it had two sides to everything, right? I've kind of figured out how they do this, but the Passive House thing was based in Germany. And I would make trips to Germany to see how things were, to go to conferences and see how they do things. And it always amazed me how they had such a high level of quality of not just design, but also execution. Yeah. And I would talk to builders like, how much do you make? And how, and they don't make any more than we do. And yet they're able to, their costs like per square foot, all things factored out, was lower. Like
in Europe,
are you able to do this? Right.
I would not have thought that at all.
And I think a lot of it is the really highly skilled and trained workforce.
Dude, you look at the difference in quality, like between here and any other part of the country, and the Northeast. Oh my God,
I noticed that.
Crazy.
I know. We did a disastrous job in Ohio once where I found that out firsthand, that we just could not find quality people to do any quality work at all.
I don't know if it's our climate or if it's just that this part of the country has been settled for longer, and the people that built here initially, it just kept going from generation to generation, being passed on.
We're lucky. We have a good tradition of craftsmanship in the Northeast, and enough money that people value that level of craftsmanship. And we have we're also a pretty conservative region in terms of architecture. Yeah. So, and older forms of architecture require more skill in terms of finish, like higher levels of trim and moldings and
but
things
those
like that.
Exact processes of making those, almost sacred kind of details have transferred into making more modern stuff too.
True.
In these areas.
True. Yeah.
And you get a much more European feel to architecture and everything and construction in the Northeast, I think, compared to anywhere else I've worked.
Yeah. I mean, California has a lot of the modernist thing going.
But it's all like, so much of it on the general level is like drive it and,
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. But that's a good thing, and maybe we could come back to housing and design a little bit. Over into all kinds of philosophical things. But another impediment to doing more Passive House for more of the general public is certainly cost. I mean, it costs more to build a better house. We all know that. Passive houses have more stuff in them, more insulation, more attention to air sealing, better ventilation, mechanicals, all that kind of stuff. So it is more expensive. And I'm in the single family house world, which we must admit is the most inefficient way of housing people, right? Yeah. But it's the American dream, and it's the whole developed world dream to have your little piece of property with your little estate on it. That's your kingdom. And that's, we're not going to do anything about that.
You live in a community though, right?
No, I don't. I did live there for a while.
Yeah,
but,
okay.
I now live next door in a drafty old farmhouse, which drives me nuts all the time. So the question is, and this is where, Passive House has always been this like boutique thing, like, the super rich can afford that, but not average people.
Right.
The big thing that Matt and I tried to found the business on was trying to break down that cost barrier and make Passive House more of a normal thing. So we've done that by incorporating it into everything we do. Right. And we just have systems where we do it over and over and over. It's not like there's no learning curve anymore. Well, we're always learning new things.
It's funny that resembles the situation in Europe that you're talking about. It's harder to make changes because you have to systematize to make it affordable.
Yeah.
So a change is more expensive, but a better product is available.
Right.
At
and
a cheaper cost.
We're behind the ball on that. Like, and it's a great example in Europe of where like building codes and energy codes changed that spurred innovation. and new products
Right.
and whole industries. And now it's like triple glazing is standard. It's not
Right.
double glazing. So it's really about the same price. And I've been to the window factories and it's totally automated and they grow the trees.
Oh, yeah, you
grow the trees.
standardize it. Everyone has to
Yeah.
do it, so they all do it, and the cost comes down.
The costs come down. And you know, why don't we have a high performance like wood window made in North America? I don't know. I guess there's not demand because there's lots of cheaper options that are inferior, but that's what we think we have. So what we need in both the design and the building side is more standardization.
Right.
And the sector of the industry that has actually gone to cost parity for passive house is multifamily.
Cost parity.
Like equality. Like
Okay.
You can build a multifamily passive house building for the same price as standard construction now, because you're taking advantage of more economies of scale.
Okay, yeah.
Bigger building, just the physics of it, the bigger the building is, it has a better ratio of surface area to floor area. So you don't need as much insulation
Right.
to make it very efficient. And you can reduce mechanicals because you've reduced the loads in the building to the point where, on balance, the cost is the same.
Right.
And this has really driven the growth of passive house. Certified square footage is the increase has been 90% on the multifamily side.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes sense in so many different ways. So how do we do that on the single family side? Well, the concept is to make it more of a manufactured product.
Right.
And this is something like the construction industry is the only major industry in the US where productivity rate has gone down in the last 30 years. The amount of product per labor hour has actually gone down. I think part of that is because with building code improvement, it's like incremental as they are. We do have better quality homes than we did, but the quality is still, it's like the lowest baseline imaginable. It's getting a little better, but we have not taken building of a house and put it into a factory where the production of every other product has gone.
Yeah.
And we're working on that by building more off-site homes. And we're doing that with panelization. There are two ways you can go about it. There's modular, which is like a box that you build and you can have a high level of finish on the inside. There are efficiencies to that, but also inefficiencies and limitations on design. And then there's a panelized approach, which is more of a European approach, again, that makes it gives you a lot more design flexibility.
And with panels, are you talking like a SIPS type panel?
Not exactly. We did a lot of buildings. Our first building, we've always utilized some degree of off-site built components in our houses. We used to frame a house conventionally and then put SIPs on the outside of it, pre-cut from another factory. We got away from that because we wanted to do more of the process in a shop. So the SIPs didn't really make any sense at that point. So we're basically building our own SIPs in a shop, but using natural products and not foam.
Right.
So that was a big shift.
That's nice.
So now we're insulating with wood fiber and cellulose, and we're going to start insulating with hemp insulation. And we're trying to make, a low carbon product, because that's the thing that like passive house wasn't focused on for a long time, was the materials that go into building the house. And people have done studies saying, if you look at the overall impact on the atmosphere, using all these foam products is not good.
No.
That's actually worse. You might as well just build a conventional house with lower embodied carbon materials than build a passive house with foam.
Right.
So we figured that out as a niche industry. So you've got to have as low a carbon product as possible, so that overall, the operational and the embodied carbon calculation is optimized.
Now, using wood products has a huge carbon sink component.
True,
right?
but
like renewable wood products.
Right. We can't take that too far because it's
Yeah.
really not the answer. Just like cut down all of our forests so
Sure,
we can
sure.
sequester carbon in buildings, because
right.
the forest does the best job of sequestering carbon than we could ever do.
Right.
So that's a whole, forest management subject that could be another podcast. But
Right.
anyway, so we are We've been doing panelization in earnest for about 5 years now.
Yep.
And really trying to refine our methods. But now what we're coming up against is, to be honest, the panelization folks in the passive house world haven't really overcome the cost factor yet.
Of like actually manufacturing the panels, or
at a cheaper cost per square foot. Okay. The cost is about the same, but the quality is much higher. Mm-hmm. Because everything's built indoors. It's not getting soaked with weather for months and months. Yeah. You can have a higher level of accuracy. You can just build a better product indoors. And what we're finding now is that we could do, like, we have standard model home designs, but none of them were designed with panelization in mind. So we're realizing that now. And we're going back through and we're optimizing our designs for panelization. And there are certain design no-nos when you want something to be panelized that we're figuring out.
Like, what are a couple of those?
A couple of those are, the tallest wall we can truck down the road is 10 feet.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying, right.
So we can build taller walls, but they have to be shipped sideways and are limited to 8 feet wide. So it just makes things, then you have to have another lift on the end to lift the panel into place. So it just gets more complicated and more expensive. Windows can't go to the floor because you can't put that into a panel. So, so we can put windows in that go to the floor. We just have to bring the window separately, assemble all the panels, and then install the window in the field. Right. Which is much more expensive because when we send a crew, overnight, there's lodging and meals and that just makes, so we can do it, but if you want a more affordable panelized home, don't do that. Right. So there are a bunch of things like that, like simpler forms to the building, fewer corners, all the things that make more efficient design are kind of amplified when you're doing it through a panelized approach. Interesting. And standardization and repetition. There are some things that are less expensive about panelization, but things that are more expensive. Like, we now have this process where we take a design and then we have to develop a very detailed 3-dimensional model showing every single stick of wood. And from that, we can get shop drawings that tell us how long to cut each piece, how many of them, they're all labeled, numbered, blah, blah, blah. It's more of a manufacturing process. But if you have to do that for every single unique home you're doing, you're not saving anything.
Right. So you have to come up with it's truly amazing to me, the level of reliability and finish that you get in a car.
Exactly.
It's just astounding.
Exactly. Yes.
Those things. We're driving a truck that 2 times across the country now that's from 2003 and has 200-some thousand miles on it. Yeah. And that's crazy. But to turn that into a home, all right, you gotta really, it takes so much money and refinement to get down to that.
Right. Well, that's the standard analogy, and it's not perfect for switching houses to more of a manufacturing process, but it's apt for sure. Like, you would never order a car and have 10,000 pieces show up on your driveway for some crew to come and put together. Right. It would just make no sense. And you wouldn't go to a car dealer and say, yeah, I like that model. Could you just make the door a little wider? Because I think that door's a little narrow. But that's how we do architecture. That's how we do design. Right. Like, even with
high customization. I want what I want.
We even have a hard time. We let our customers do too much customization. We have to draw the line, and we have to say, but we have to show that there's a benefit to that. Yeah. And we're gonna kind of divide our line of homes into one line that is truly the standard line, and it's been optimized for panelization, and it's going to cost you this much. Still very nice architecturally, still the same performance, the same feel, comfort, all that stuff. Or you can have this other line where, you can make changes if you want, but it's going to cost you, significantly more. Right. And I'm really interested to see how the public, how the buying customer reacts to that. Right. Right. And as we do more of the standard ones, it should drive the cost down as we repeat it over and over.
Yeah, you have a interesting battle in front of you, because you have the battle in front of you that I had to go through in designing and building our house, which is a huge educational and cultural expectation. Like, you're dealing with people's emotions at this point, and it's story and experience that change emotions rather than facts changing what they think they know.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had to go through so much ulcer and everything else
Right.
to not have a basement.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
why would you blast a basement into solid granite?
Right.
And then like the concrete floor is the finished floor. I can't tell you how many tradespeople and everything else have come in and be like, so what are you going to do with the floor?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
no, it's a concrete floor.
Yeah,
we like it.
Yeah.
Like one person came
Yeah.
and was like, wow, what an amazing house. You're not leaving the floor like that. What are you doing with the floor? And
Yeah.
no, we like it.
Yeah.
All those
Yeah.
things, and it's just the expectations of, no, this is how I lived when I was a child in a home.
Right.
So I want to do that now.
Exactly.
And then you have to say, well, if you do this construction and you take a part of that to make that a garage, you've just, taken this very expensive building process that's, designed to do the interior space, and you want to add a garage to that with a heated space above, and you don't have this. And it's just, there's so much going on there that we really approached our house. We kept it rectangle, one single roof, no valleys. So we were able to do standing seam, and it was almost as cheap as doing shingles because it was just 2 planes. That's it. We didn't go crazy. And our investment was in one window wall, like that in the living room, really valuable, and it cost a pretty penny, but that was the one place we did that. And the rest of the house is pretty much standard, like normal size bathrooms with normal like IKEA cabinets and that kind of stuff. But there's this one thing where like we want to invest in that. We want our living room to feel like you can almost just walk out onto the grass, and we have a very small yard that's rimmed by ledge on the outside, which it feels great, and it was pretty affordable. We didn't go to the degree that you guys go to with panelization and everything, but we did double walls foot thick with cellulose, and then triple pane Logic windows I think we used. And I just can't express how nice it is to first have the mini split to like, this is the first house I've ever had that has air conditioning in the summer. Right. And it's so efficient. It's just like you walk in and it doesn't feel like you're in an air conditioned space. You're just in a very comfortable space.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And the whole thing, to like our master bedroom is small for a, what do we call it now?
Primary bedroom.
Primary bedroom.
So,
primary bedroom is, it's not that big, and we have a little bathroom off of there, but, it's like I don't spend much time in those areas, and I don't need to invest all that money in it. So we really pared everything down to like how we wanted to live and where we knew we needed to spend the money or wanted to spend it. And that helped gauge expectations and all that. It helped, but
that sounds totally great. And I totally support the idea of you make one move, like one luxury move in your house, and it's a wall of windows or whatever. That's great.
Each family kind of has their thing that they gravitate towards.
Right. Yeah. Some people, it's the kitchen. I've got to have this or that kitchen appliance, or I've got to have, and it gets funny. Like when people say, a passive house is too expensive. Well, like how much did your granite countertop cost, and how much was your jacuzzi tub, or all these like high-end things that you couldn't live without, but you certainly could live without more insulation, because at the end of the day, it's not sexy. Like it's a passive thing. Like you don't interact with it. It's just there doing.
You got to use me as a consultant. See, I
know.
I got my hot tub used off of Craigslist for like less than $1,000. So you can just hand them that.
Yeah.
And we got our countertops from IKEA.
There you go.
There you go.
Well,
and then our kitchen island is basically those IKEA solid wood desktops.
Yeah.
Just it goes across and then does the waterfall again down to the side. And I put leftover cedar in for the infill. And everyone's like, oh, this is a nice island. It's like, it's temporary, but 3-year temporary at this point.
I have that in my house. Yeah. I mean, it's fun to get creative. It's hard to do that. Again, those are very custom details, and like, is your builder on board with it? Or
I was always encouraged
do it?
And inspired by like, we don't have the money, so get creative.
Yeah.
That to me was always like, now I really get to be creative. So
yeah. No, it's great. So anyway, our whole focus right now is better utilization of panelized process, and with the goal of reducing cost, because it's an incredibly expensive time to build right now. Like material and volatile and unpredictable. And I don't see, like, we can't do much about materials. What we can do is make the execution cheaper by reducing the amount of labor. I mean, that's kind of the only lever we have. And the way to do that is to have more standardized homes, which, you know, you don't want to say like it's a factory or we're making a product, but it turns out that's what it is. You don't couch, you're like, it still has to be a home and all those good connotations that home has.
Right.
And we can do that, but in just a somewhat different way to go about it. And the interesting thing is like how the architecture changes when you make some of those things, like wall heights and windows that are 18 inches off the floor and simpler forms. And is that, just like you're saying with your house, does that say house to people the way that, you know, some colonial or, you know, the fact that like people have to have divided light windows that are like 7x9 glass, and that's what a house is.
We don't have any in here.
Right. That's a house to a lot of people. But where does that come from? It just comes from, in the 18th century, that was the limit of glass technology. You couldn't make glass any bigger. So that became traditional. But now it's, that's a window. I don't know. It's just like there's so many like interesting cultural things that we're up against in designing
I just
more modern
love
homes.
that we still have plastic shutters on houses that
were
you to even be able to close them, they wouldn't
do anything. Yeah,
we still have to have them on there.
It's hilarious. Yeah. Or a chimney. Like a passive house doesn't need a chimney. But is it a house without a chimney? It's a mini split. Like it just goes through the wall with these little tubes.
Right.
You know, and where's the heat coming from? Like it's just, and it's not, you know, I've had people complain that our houses are too quiet because this is another benefit. They're so quiet, and you know that, like the triple glazed windows and the levels of insulation, and
too quiet becomes too loud.
It can. I know.
Because then if you have kids in the house, holy cow.
Well, that's true. Well, you need some sound deadening where you can, but
that's the first thing I did this morning was I pounded on the floor with my foot because my boys get up at like 6 a.m. to do homeschool. I tell them to sleep in and they keep doing, but so they're down there and they're fighting over like a pencil, and I'm just like, ugh.
How old are they?
12 and 10.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. They're funny little guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, yesterday Grayson got up, or the day before, he got up at like 5:30. Yeah. He just woke up and he's like, oh, I guess I'll go down and empty the dishwasher. Which is great. I mean, good for emptying the dishwasher, but come on, 5:30?
Yeah, right. It's not a quiet operation.
No.
No, my kids did that for the longest time.
They would get up that early?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the sleep deprivation was really challenging in the first few years.
That's where all this gray came from.
Yeah,
I didn't have any gray until we started losing sleep on a consistent basis.
And
our youngest son at sometimes like 3:45, you'd hear him go, meh, and you knew that within 5 more meh, it would be meh.
Yeah.
And he'd be up for the rest of the morning. Yeah. And my wife was just like, she's the only one who had anything you needed. And she was, every day getting up at like 4 a.m. for 4 or 5 years. And then she was out at like 8, just, dead. So
I didn't do anything productive for the first 5 years. I like around home. Home time was just, holding, keeping the fort down for like a solid 5 years. And then finally I was like, after that point, I can actually do a project. I could like paint a room or something. Yeah.
They say you get little kids for 4 years. And then after that, if you haven't done your work, you've got a lot of work on your hands. So it's probably good.
Yeah. I just want to check on the time. How are we doing?
Oh, we're great. I mean, we just go as long as people are still interested. So
yeah. I do have a call to make at 1.
Well, it is almost 1, and we've been going for a while, so we should wrap it up.
Okay, let's wrap it up.
Well, I really appreciate you coming down and doing this. I've really been able to enjoy actually sitting down and going through this stuff with you, because we've crossed paths all the time in work, but never really able to sit down and pick your brain on this real technical, but also, it's like a technical, moral, and environmental approach to doing this that I think is a really interesting combination of all of that. And people that pick that up and go with it, it's not an easy lift. And I respect you for that, and I really appreciate that you're doing that. And you are making a difference. And sometimes people that are making a difference who don't feel like they're making a difference need to hear that. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
There's a house that went up just down the street from my house over here, and like the first thing people say is, "Oh, it looks like a Go Home."
Oh, really?
Like, no, it's a complete ripoff.
Yeah, that happened, but that's fine. That's totally fine.
Well, it's the most sincere form of flattery.
Exactly. Yes.
Right?
Well, thanks a lot. This has been really fun and really interesting. And
thank you
for your
thank
thoughts
you.
and
We went
questions.
all over the place.
We did.
Great.
Yeah, it was good.
Alan Gibson of Go Logic. You can reach Alan at Go Logic at just gologic.com or
GoLogic.us.
gologic.us. Are you guys on Instagram and Facebook and all that too?
Yeah.
Do you know your Instagram
At
handle?
Go Logic, I think.
Somewhere in
probably.
I should know that too.
Try
I'll
to
follow you
stay
guys.
away from that, but yeah, you can find it. Go Logic.
Yeah.
Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, I have some on there. I'm too old to figure that stuff out. I don't know.
Never too old. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, Alan Gibson, thank you so much. Check out his upcoming design theory article coming up in is it June or July issue?
I'm not really sure.
In an upcoming issue of Maine Home Design.
Thank you very much, Trent. Appreciate it.